Welcome and thank you for registering and logging in to this another of our webinars. This one promises to be just as informative and engaging as the others. Today we are looking at scenario planning, a tool for organizational repositioning. And don't we need to do that in today's environment? And so as we begin, we, as usual, want to ensure that we all know what we need to do to have the best possible learning experience, sharing engagement experience in this virtual learning space. And so, for those who are not as familiar, we want to encourage you to close your other software applications, except, of course, for WebEx. And we invite you to mute your phone. This is a learning opportunity, and we want you to focus for the next hour with us on this learning engagement. So mute your phones, whether it is your cell phone, whether it's in your office phone, landline, at your home, wherever you may be. And remind your colleagues you're not available for the next hour or so. And if you do have an internet cable to plug that in, that does allow for better connectivity. And if you do have a good headset and microphone, to also use that as well. And so we want to also remind you, or for the first time that you are using this platform, to share with you ways in which you can interact. You would notice that once you enter the virtual learning room, that you are muted upon entry. That's just really to avoid a lot of feedback noise. But there are so many ways in which you can engage in this learning experience. And so if you look to the right of your screen on your phone, you'll notice a list of these, but you'll also see a toolbar. And below that, you see that toolbar to the left of the toolbar, starting at the left, you'll see a hand that is pointed upwards. That's a raise hand feature. And so when we are inviting comments and questions, that's one way in which you can interact. You just click on the raised hand icon, and we will see your hand. And we'll also see your hand in the order in which persons raise their hand, and we will get to each and every hand. So then right beside the raise hand feature is the green tick or the green check mark. And so if we want to, everybody to answer yes to a particular question, then we can use that green check mark. So we'd invite you, if you have found the green check mark, just to click on it for me. And I do see a few. Maria, yes. Tony, nice to have you, Tony. Mars, Melissa, I see quite a few green check marks. Great. And to remove the green check mark, just simply click on the green check mark sign again, and you will get rid of it. Right beside the green check mark is the red X. And so if your response to a question that we pose is no, then you would click on the X, the red X. So let me know if you have found the red X. Just click on it so we'll know, right? And I see quite a few X's. Great. So to remove the X, you can also, again, click on the X again, and your X will go away. All right? Now, the other feature I want to show you is the chat. So that is down below the names, and you'll see chat, and you'll see send to. And so we want you to be sharing comments that all of us can participate by reading and responding to. So do select send to all participants, all right? So if you have found the chat feature, you can say good morning. I see that, Natasha. Great, I'm seeing Melissa, Miguel, lots of good morning. Michelle, Starla, Monica, Carla, Debbie. Fantastic. I do notice a couple of persons are still having challenges connecting their audio, so I'm just posting the instructions to connect your audio in the chat. Great. So one other feature I want to show you is the pointer tool. And so right above the screen, above the slide, you will see another toolbar. If you start at the far left, you'll see a right-facing arrow. When you click on that arrow, that's your pointer tool, your cursor becomes a right-facing arrow. And then you can drag it and drop it where you wish. So you see my pointer tool there. It is pointed at annotation tool. It has my name on it. All right? So we're going to give you an opportunity to find your pointer tool. And so we want you to point on the arrow. Which country are you joining from our CARICAD member states? And if you can't find your pointer tool, because I know some of you might be logging in on your mobile, so you might not easily find your pointer tool, you can just type in the chat where you are joining from. So I am joining from Jamaica, where it is overcast and I am praying for rain. And I see a couple of people in the chat, Dave, Aliman, lots of people joining from different areas. All right, so I think some people can't find the pointer tool. So my dear virtual producer, I'm going to ask you to go into participant and to assign privileges so that persons can use the pointer tool perhaps. All righty, thank you so much. So lots of you registered for this webinar. It's one of the highest levels of registration we have seen. So we assume people are very, very interested in this topic. And I'm seeing people, you know, yes, people join from Guyana, Trinidad. Thank you. A real CARICOM experience here. So the first question I want to ask you is this. Do you believe that your organization needs to reposition itself? And so give me a green check mark if yes, you think your organization needs to reposition itself. And no, if you don't need to reposition, your organization does not need to reposition itself. So green check mark, does your organization need to reposition itself? X, if you don't. And I'm seeing lots of green check marks. Thank you very much. No, I figure that most, you know, this is why you're here, because your organization needs to reposition itself. So I want to get a little bit more information from you. And so you can use the chat. You can quickly raise your hand. You can respond in either way. But respond to this question for us. What are some of the specific challenges being faced that requires organizational repositioning in your context? What are some of the specific challenges you're facing? So we all need to reposition, you know, but there are some things that are peculiar to your context. I see Tony says, client difficulties dealing with COVID, yes. And Neil says there's a need to use more technology, more use of technology, yeah. Nicole said the same thing. How do you deal with, you know, the physical distancing that is required? Marcella says is a lot more training that's required. Starla says diminished resources. Yes, that's a scenario everybody's is faced with. Michelle Bermason is saying, yeah, you know, suddenly trainers have to shift to delivering online. There's a mindset shift that's required. Employee relations have changed, yeah, because of what's happening now and how we deliver services. That's Melissa from Guyana. Kaliman says there's a need for digitization and making the transition to the new normal with the same or chances are less funds, yeah. Roles are no longer as clear, true. So job roles are changing right before our eyes. Donna from Belize is saying you need to have innovative ways to enhance revenue collection in these times. The same old won't work. Quickly acquiring the capability to collect and use data for quick decisions, making quick decision making in a very fluid environment, and the future is so uncertain. Yeah, you have to be making decisions very rapidly. It's like you have to change your tire while driving the car. Shelley talks about sharing documents online. It's the whole digitization, eh? They're doing a point to the same thing. What do you offer the same services, but digitized using the technology? Tisha says, the implementation of project activity requires more innovative ways of achieving results. Indeed, you know, many of us know, yes, we have been leading a project, but our project team is now remote. How do we deal with that? The people you're working with are not as accessible, right? Monica says, how do we ensure accountability? And I'm assuming, Monica, you're talking about accountability perhaps in an environment people are working more flexibly, either remotely or on different shifts, different days. Michelle also talks about revising your budget, getting the staff to change their mindset from the old ways of doing things. Indeed. You know, a colleague of mine recently in a meeting said, you know, there are two ways to change. You can do so incrementally, you know, over time, so you have to take your time, do it, or you get a big, a massive shift, a massive change, a massive thing happens in your circumstances, in your environment, and the change is forced, and it happens dramatically and almost immediately, right? So Bernadette also raised, trying to achieve your objectives in the face of strained resources. Indeed, we have seen certainly in the region our revenue base, you know, has gone down. And so it doesn't mean our objectives go through the window. We still have to achieve them, but we're going to do that. Samira, balancing work and family life. Imagine persons who are working remotely and assisting small children. Aha. So this, you know, so we're talking about scenarios and not just about repositioning the organization, but people and families, individuals have to reposition themselves as well. Yeah. And then Shelley talks about, as we talk about this shift that and repositioning around digitization, there's the issue about data protection legislation to protect confidential information, indeed. And I see that again about how, you know, changes in how we deliver training. Yeah, are we ready for that? For those of us who are in the learning and development business, indeed. So I really want to thank you all for just sharing so openly about the various ways in which you have to reposition in your peculiar organizational context. So we are going to get going and coming to our speaker or presenter for today. Oh yes, Samira, I'm seeing that comment about you know, the uncertainty of COVID-19. Yeah, you know, it's not like a hurricane. Hurricanes are bad enough, but you know, they kind of come and then they go. But COVID is the gift that keeps on giving. When it's going to end? Are we going to have second waves, third waves, etc., etc.? There's a lot of uncertainty. And so how do we reposition ourselves to deal with the various uncertainties? And indeed, scenario planning is certainly a tool for organizational repositioning, particularly as it relates to dealing with uncertainty. Now, CARICAD this year celebrates its 40th anniversary. We have been in existence 40 years when we serve 17 member states across the Caribbean. And our work really is about helping member states to transform their public sectors in order to contribute to the sustainable development of the member states as well as the region at large. And our work is governed and driven by our public service charter. And what you see displayed on the screen here is our conceptual framework for the charter. This really is a framework that was developed to create a unified way of our member states approaching this business of public sector transformation. And it is based on 6 pillars: governance, standards, capacity building, accountability, openness, and legislation, right? And of course, all of this is about having public services that are citizen-oriented and public services that are results-oriented, resilient societies, sustainability, and responsiveness. And certainly, this particular topic that we're dealing with today definitely is about increasing our capacity to be more results focused and to do so through appropriate and flexible planning through one such tool, which is scenario planning. And so this next slide kind of breaks down the 6 pillars and the various sub-themes under each. And if you want to learn more, then you can visit our website at CARICAD.net. So our presenter today is somebody who is, I consider, a friend of CARICAD. He is Mr. Sean Gray. He is currently the Chief Technical Director with the Office of the Cabinet, and he has responsibility for the Performance Monitoring and Evaluation branch of the Office of the Cabinet. And in that role, that division really has responsibility for whole of government strategic planning, monitoring, and evaluation. So at this time, I am going to hand over the ball to Sean. He will present for around, say about 30 minutes or so. And we're going to ask you to hold your questions until the end of his presentation. And in the meantime, we want to encourage you to use the chat to type the questions that you might have to pose to him while he presents. You know, those comments and questions might come up as you're listening to the presentation. But we'll take those at the end of the presentation. So Sean, over to you. So unmute yourself, Sean. You have the ball.
Okay.
Is everybody hearing Sean? Give a green check mark if you're hearing Sean. Sean, just speak to make sure they can hear you.
Thank you, Lloyd. Good morning, colleagues.
Yes, we see a lot of green check marks, so they are hearing you. Great. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for registering for this webinar. And this morning, I want to talk to you briefly about scenario planning and what is the issue that we are facing in our organizations across the region. And the issue is we are really operating in an environment that is uncertain, very volatile. A lot of writers call it we are operating in turbulent waters and unpredictable. And the challenge that we have as managers is that we have to make key decisions that will reinforce the need to develop new strategies and to reposition our organization so that we can continue to add and create value. Scenario planning really provides a structured framework that will allow us to evaluate these factors and link them to what is happening today to what is likely to happen tomorrow, and to provide us with strategic solutions. So my presentation today will see us talking about scenario planning, looking a little bit at a life case, a number of scenario planning exercises are facilitated over the last 8 or 9 weeks. But I'll focus on a live case with the Cabinet Office, in particular our division, our branch. And I'll demonstrate to you how we can build some scenarios and apply them to our new strategic direction using a business model approach. Yes. Right. So as I said before, what's in an environment? We're really operating in an environment where you have many issues that are connected and complex, and this really poses a challenge to organizations to respond. So whether it was 9/11 and subsequent developments coming out of 9/11 for the traveling or aviation industry, climate change and its interaction and intersection with food, water, and energy stresses that many countries face, the impact of ICT achievement and how businesses carried out, consumer appetite, global financial crisis and its aftermath. We know about the health pandemics, global migration crisis, and high employment are just some of the few things that come to mind that really impacts how organizations operate, deliver products and services, and how we develop policies as governments. A quick definition of scenario planning. I've identified 3, there are many others, but a tool for ordering one's perceptions about alternative future environments in which one's decision might play out. That part of strategic planning, which relates to tools and technologies for managing the uncertainties of the future. And my favorite, the disciplined method of imagining possible futures in which organization decisions may be played out. Just to define some key terms, so it will help you to craft your possible questions. A scenario is a cohesive set of assumptions that describe a view of the future. It is then used to develop a forecast to test strategy, plan, and decisions. A term that I'll use in the presentation is about driving forces, factors causing change, affecting or shaping the future. Non-significant drivers, which are factors that will become significant in the future but may not be apparent to all as significant today. These factors should be included in your scenario planning, but it is up to the manager or the organization to recognize and apply those factors. A trend is a predetermined element or direction of a movement of change over time. And trends should have high impact and low uncertainty, meaning we can actually predict trends by looking at data, looking at past events. Uncertainty, a state of having limited knowledge about the future, but these uncertainties also should be considered if they are high impact and also difficult to predict. So, when do we use scenario planning? Of course, as I said before, when events are happening, we are in a turbulent society. So when uncertainty is high about our operations, our future in terms of the role that organizations will play in the new normal, or the budgetary allocations that will be afforded to us. Coupled with that, we have many external shocks, insufficient new opportunities being created by our organizations, meaning that we have organizations that have not changed in how they deliver their products and services and in the quality or variety of those products and services. We can use scenario planning when we need an alternative to traditional planning and forecasting approaches. So these traditional forecasting approaches around statistical techniques, decision analysis, and standard forecasting, but we won't get into those today. I took some time out to look at what was happening in the public sector in Jamaica, and doing some work for CARICAD Secretariat. I got an opportunity to actually survey and speak to a number of public sector colleagues across the region. And looking at those environments, I have put forward some challenges that we're facing. And one is our ability to access our data. Is data available? Not many countries have sophisticated data collection systems at all levels of government and on a national scale, especially around how we are performing and operating as public sector entities. Low planning and forecasting culture. A number of entities suffer from low strategic thinking, reactive management styles across the public sector, low risk assessment and risk management capacity, poor ability to shift strategic business direction. So organizations are not agile. I compare many organizations that I work with in Jamaica as massive oil tankers. You know, they take miles to go before they can actually turn around. Industry change can be rapid, yeah? And sometimes we don't have what I call these early warning systems or processes that will signal when change is about to happen. Inadequate prioritization processes. And why I've mentioned this is that it inhibits planning when you are operating in an environment where everything that we do is a priority. And that creates a lot of additional complexity on our resources and sometimes give different signals in terms of strategic direction. Slow decision on what processes and strategies to eliminate, reduce, or to even introduce. And that means that we are not balancing the trade-off between our core strategies and our non-core strategies. Organizations sometimes have inefficient coordination relating to stakeholders for effective implementation. And we see that even with some of our response mechanisms to the COVID crisis. And I call it really having no shared vision. So these are some of the challenges of scenario planning in our context within the public sector. So what are the steps? And I must clarify that these steps have come out of not only what the writings and the writers have proposed, but how we have adapted them to the context that we face in Jamaica, where we don't have a lot of time to actually go through a lot of processes to develop our strategic plans, because we have to shift our planning direction now that we are responding to the COVID. So the first step, there are really 4 steps that I've identified, 3 of which are common in the text. One, step 4, we have added here in Jamaica to sort of shift to implement from the planning to development of implementation of the new strategy. So I have identified the steps, and below I have given some actions and tools, yes, to perform and to support each step. As you will recall in the definition, scenario planning is about providing a structured approach to identifying and scoping our issues to determine what is happening today, to link that to what might likely happen tomorrow. So step 1 is about identifying uncertainties. Now, if you recall, in your traditional strategic planning process, there's a point where we look at assessing the environment. And it is in assessing the environment, we really want to look at what is the scale and the scope of the problem, and what are some of our decision variables that we have to consider. And also how our stakeholders should respond to the new demands of the organization. So in step one, we have to do problem identification and to identify what are driving forces and driving factors. Remember, I said at this point, some may be key and other factors may not be so apparent now, but could become important in the future. In identifying these uncertainties that have high impact and high uncertainty, this is where at this point you would start to identify those issues. Here in the PMEB, in the Cabinet Office, we use really questionnaires where we use online polling to get in touch with our stakeholders and to find out what is happening and to respond to key questions. And we are fortunate in that we have been engaging our stakeholders formally like this since 2010. So we actually have a database and a lot of analysis in terms of how our stakeholders will respond to shift in how we apply the program of managing for results. Of course, the traditional PESTEL and SWOT and SWOT analysis. You have to review as an organization past performance and evaluate how existing strategic plans have been implemented at this stage, and really assess the importance and relevance of your strategies and identify trends from this analysis and also put together uncertainties. I've highlighted just some techniques. You could either do a desktop survey or desktop work or do some online workshops and questionnaires, as I said. In step two is where we start to compile plausible scenarios and identify these strategic opportunities and challenges. One of the techniques is the parental analysis, where we basically pick the top 20% of the issues that we have uncovered in the analysis and then build scenarios, develop our scenario matrix, and define our pathways. Step three is now about selecting strategies. And in selecting those strategies, depending on your organization, one would need to consider either selecting in partnership with stakeholders, or it can be an internal process where the organization and its management team will determine the strategic direction based on defined pathways that you would take based on the plausible scenarios that could happen in the future, and develop strategic objectives. And I've given some tools here like a strategy table, the collection and assessment of options of strategies. I'll show you some of the techniques a little later on. Refining scenarios and strategies, and identifying those optimum strategies that can actually change and reposition your organization. And step four is implementation. Is where you ensure that the new strategic or revised strategic direction is actually deployed in a way that it fits a particular business model of your organization to the plausible scenarios that you're planning around. We have to ensure that we have the kind of mechanisms to develop risk management structures. Now, it's about ensuring that we can monitor our environment to see if any risk factors are emerging so that we can mitigate. We have to design our programs now around logic Now, it's not enough just to identify a strategy, but in then designing your programs or projects or even policies, we have to now get into the habit of developing some sort of logical framework, a theory of change that considers the scenarios that we are planning for, but also identifies the impact your projects will have on the beneficiaries. Budgeting. We have learned recently that the first impact of COVID-19 here in Jamaica is how we would have projected our budget. And management has a challenge in that we have to make sure that we are prioritizing properly so that when we adjust our strategic direction, we know how to cost those strategies that will take us in a new path. So we have to have a new approach to budgeting. And why we have budgeting here is because budgeting now forms an input to the new strategic plan. Budgeting is no longer. Yes?
Sorry to interrupt. Just remembering, we want to leave some time for discussion.
Right.
So we have another 12 minutes of.
I'm chopping low. I'm at.
All right, great.
Yeah, man. I'm watching the time. Okay, so budgeting is important, and we actually have to make sure that we develop performance measurement frameworks to see how well we're implementing in the new context, and improve our accountability by ensuring that we have performance appraisals around these new deliverables. What's a live case? What are we doing at the Cabinet Office? The branch that I operate, basically, as Loy said, really delivers results-based management across government and look at monitoring, planning, monitoring, and evaluation of a whole of government initiatives. Our core strategies have not changed, which we have to lead the institutionalization of our performance management systems, provide operational oversight, building planning, monitoring, and evaluation capacities, supporting the demand and supply of monitoring and evaluation information to support decision making and applying appropriate research and statistical methods. In applying scenario planning this year, we looked at some principles, and this is important for management to understand that with the impact of COVID-19 and applying scenario planning, we have to be very focused on how we engage our employees, engage our stakeholders, increase use of ICT, benchmarking better practices, and actively scanning the environment, both internally and externally. We carried out extensive environmental analysis using SWOT, tested stakeholder analysis, and value curves. Now, value curves are important in our case so that we can actually assess if our core strategies are relevant. The thinking behind this is that to reposition your organization, we don't necessarily need to change what is at our core, but use our core strategies to pivot around the issues that would have emerged during the scenario planning exercise. So this is a SWOT analysis. I just provided this for information, but also to show you the detail that is required to do the SWOT. And this is just provided for, tested is provided for some information. I just wanted to take 2 minutes and talk about the value curve analysis. It really allows organizations to evaluate your products and services in relation to a similar entity that perform your function somewhere in the world. And it's really there to ensure that you are looking at the gaps within your processes and comparing it to counterpart entities across maybe the globe or within the region. We did about 6 or 7 analysis. I'm just presenting one, and we compare Jamaica's approaches to that of South Africa. And we see where the gaps were. But we also recognize that we did not need to change our core strategies, but to enhance them so that we can pivot around the COVID-19 experience. So these are some of the trends that came out of the analysis. And really we have to look at global impacts, of course, of the virus and the economic implications, not only for our region, but also Jamaica. And we looked at regional issues regarding even countries that are reopening and how they were reopening, and whether or not there were other approaches by governments in terms of how they would start implementing new normal. Locally, we have to evaluate the impact on the activities of our partner MDAs. We had a national curfew. Work from home was lifted on June 1. And we have to evaluate those issues and trends, along with uncertainties. And I just named a few from the exercise that we undertook. What's the duration? Lloyd said that we may have subsequent waves of this virus, and the severity could shift depending on population. The duration of recovery or the reopening phases, and exactly what is the new normal, meaning that we can't really predict these issues, but they have high impact on whatever strategies we select. So we have to analyze these factors and dependencies. So you take the trends and uncertainties and you start to combine, identifying and combining them. And we use the 80-20 rule. So we look at those trends and uncertainties, of course, that have high impact. And we list in a prioritized way. And I've highlighted 4 there. Continued relevance and effectiveness of the branch that I operate. Because of the drastic cut in our budget, we realize that resources will be affected. We have already got the indication that we will not be able to fill some critical posts that we had identified. So, our effectiveness is threatened. The continued implementation of our electronic performance management systems, they require a lot of resources, a lot of training. And that too is important. A number of MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies have actually shifted their focus and are now very either reluctant or unable to report on their performance because staff is now working, they are now working from home. The ability for oversight and management of projects are negatively affected. And a number of projects have those actually been delayed or ceased. And of course, I put health and wellness of staff and planners out there who may be affected as among the top 4 issues. And in creating these scenarios, we have constructed a matrix. And in developing your scenario, you have to identify 2 of the 4 driving forces that I just identified. So we identified the continued relevance and effectiveness of the PMEB and the efficient rollout, prompt and efficient rollout of the EPMS. And what you have to do, you have to identify that factor and write a positive and a negative. So we realize that at the top of my chart, I have the continued rollout. And at the bottom, where is the negative, I'm saying that we have the continued relevance, and PMEB does not continue to be relevant. And we have efficient and effective rollout just to the right of the left of the chart, and then slow rollout of the PMS. So that is how you set up the chart. Now, in each quadrant, you are comparing, yes, each factor together. So if we continue to be relevant, and also there's prompt and efficient rollout of the PMS, scenario A has been developed. And developing the scenario is really about brainstorming with your staff and your stakeholders. And you're looking for a result that has very high impact or influence and relevance to the situation. So successful, we would see those factors that we are adopting the system. Ministries and agencies are really applying the work, enhance accountability. So that's the best outcome we could have based on the two factors that we're comparing. Scenario B is by analyzing and comparing what would happen if we continue to be relevant, but there's a slow rollout of the systems because maybe we have a lack of resources or shifting focus of our organizations. And we identify those likely and plausible actions and events that would characterize that scenario. And it's really about that scenario, I call it status maintained. Scenario C, which is at the lower left-hand quadrant, is really looking at what is a good outcome. So that we continue, yes, that we are not effective, but we continue to roll out our systems. And we identify those as our tools and techniques are utilized, planners and M&E technicians, their competencies are increased. And that is good based on where we find ourselves today and what is expected to happen with COVID later on. And then we have to identify a worst case where the impact of COVID is so dramatic, is that our branch and our unit would be negatively affected in terms of our relevance, and that would have a slow rollout of our systems. And you would see that through the brainstorming exercise, our planners would become disinterested, and we would not have results to track and poor public service delivery. In this exercise, having looked at the various scenarios, we need to now apply them. And I'll soon be finished. And this is how it's applied. You have to identify your core strategies, and then for each scenario, develop alternative futures. So I'll just focus on scenario D, which is likely to happen with the impact on our resources that we have. And this is how we need to reposition the direction of the PMEB to respond to the very worst scenario. Meaning, our core strategy is to institutionalize the performance management system. So we need to now move to legislative action and strong policy action to provide improved oversight. If this scenario should occur, we need to make PMEB's oversight role, we have to establish it in law. To continue to build capacity, one of the strategies will be moving to certification requirements. So our planners would be self-driven in order to develop the kind of competencies to maintain their roles and their job functions. Support the demand and use of M&E information. In the worst case scenario, we think that we would have to engage external entities, maybe IDBs, World Bank, Caribbean Development Bank, to put pressure on governments to report on performance on M&E information. We would have to need to develop a set of strong incentives that are linked to accountability that would compel organizations to focus on reporting on the implementation of strategy. And our final core strategy, which have to do with research and statistical methods, maybe we need to consider outsourcing some of our functions if we can support all the resources that we need internally. So I've presented for each scenario a set of strategies to respond to that scenario. So for the best case, what do you need to do? If you have no change, which is an option that some organizations will decide not to take action, then their strategic plans would basically remain the same. And a good outcome, yes, what would be some of those strategies that we would need? And then in the worst case, at the Cabinet Office, I'm actually planning for the worst case and looking at how we can shift strategic direction. And in doing so, this is my final slide, we would need to develop a business model and a revised business model that would indicate how the branch would continue to create value, deliver our products and services while innovating in this changing environment. And I'll invite you to take your time. I know that you will have the presentation. But this business model, what is important, how it supports scenario planning, is that you can create several business models and test them based on the scenarios that are credibly likely to happen and how your organization will respond. So this brings me to the end of my presentation. I will hand over to Lloyd to field your questions.
Great, Sean. Thank you so much. Before you pass the ball to me, Sean, never mind, it's all right. There is a question in relation to, I think it's slide 8. The first question was, people asking about the tools. You see where I have it there, PESTLE, SWOT, TWOS. So the question we asked, what does the tool stand for? That was the first question from Michael in the chat. So Sean, you can unmute yourself and just elaborate.
Okay, thank you for the question. It's really the reverse of SWOT. I mean, in doing the SWOT analysis, what you do, you have to compare which strengths the organization possesses that can actually turn around your weaknesses or take advantage of your opportunities. So it's really a deeper look at the SWOT, but by comparing your strengths to what opportunities your strengths can actually take advantage of. It's done in the tools analysis. And similar, what strengths can mitigate the threats, and then you do that analysis. So it's really a deeper assessment of your SWOT by comparing the findings from the SWOT.
Okay, fantastic. So the next question is, what role, if any, does scenario planning play in effective project management? This is a question from Arlene McComey.
Thanks for the question, Arlene. I think scenario planning should play a role, an important role in your project, either at the design stage, where you're using a lot of information from the environment to figure out what possibly could be the response of if the project has some beneficiaries involved. Yes, what could possibly be their response in a changing environment? I'll give you an example that, a short example, that you may design a project and the project sits on the shelf for maybe 2 or 3 years before it gets funding or implemented. By pursuing scenario planning, you can take that project and put it in the context of today and say to yourselves, if you're going to implement this project today, what is the likely impact it could have tomorrow in a turbulent environment? And then start to look at those elements of the project that you would need to change based on the likely outcomes that you see in the future. It's really a good technique in order for you to see and assess with your stakeholders what is plausible. And we have to recall that projects are implemented in a dynamic environment. And we would take that information and maybe change the design or even the funding or even the approach of the project for it to be very relevant when when it actually is completed in the future. We have so many projects in the public sector that are completed and we can't demonstrate the results or the impact it has, the relevance of them, we can't assess. So I think scenario planning will play a very good role in project management and implementation, especially if you have delays between design and implementation. Or you may have a change in the environment while you are implementing, such as the COVID-19.
Thank you so much. So there are two questions that Shelley Collymore has posed. Just talked about, given the importance of ICT, will governments need to provide computers to all employees? And you also, Shelley, later asked a question about how will sick leave be managed, how will vacation leave be restructured? And so, Shelley, in all fairness, that is above our pay grade. And I think something that individual governments, government as employers will have to negotiate with their employees and with their representatives, the various trade unions. So thanks for that question, but very pertinent, Shelley, very pertinent. And keep your questions coming. Now, Michelle Berry Mason at a point had asked you to go back to a slide, the slide on the SWOT analysis. So I'm going to go to that slide. I'm trying to figure out where that slide would be. All right, so Michelle, I am going to unmute you and ask you, what was the specific question you wanted? Is this a slide you are referencing?
Yes, that's a slide, Lloyd, and good morning to everyone. I just wanted Sean to delve a little bit in the, the breakout, because I know he was moving fast. So even though I'm looking at it, I wanted him to kind of go into some of the areas that's presented here. But if time doesn't allow, I'll understand.
Yeah, time is kind of against us, and you will get the slide. But really, this is really looking at, his particular branch, and when they came up with as their SWOT analysis, the strengths they had, the weaknesses they identified, the opportunities, and of course their strengths.
Right there. The duck was sitting on the egg, yeah.
All right, but thank you for that, Michelle. So, Sean, I don't know if you want to say just a little bit on that.
Yeah.
All right, I think the most important nugget I could advise the meeting about carrying out the SWOT is to ensure that the management mindset is clear. As the SWOT analysis, for it to be truthful, has to be based on a lot of empirical evidence or data. And as I said before, the PMEB, we actually survey our environment twice a year. A SWOT analysis can be hard to look at because you have to truthfully identify your weaknesses. And that involves taking a lot of accountability. So our project, we realized that our main project is our electronic reporting tool. That second to last bullet from the bottom of the chart there for weakness. I had to admit to my staff that we didn't have a risk management plan if something went wrong with the rollout of the project. And we had to, get to work to put in risk management capabilities. And that some of our processes are just not documented. So I think the most important approach to the SWOT is that we have to really, in carrying it out, eliminate our biases and our illusions, and really take a hard look at your organization and look at how your stakeholders are responding, yes, in order to get the SWOT analysis tool being very effective. Thanks, Lord.
Great. And this response that you just gave segues into another question that is posed in the chat. And this is, what kinds of skills and competencies do we need to develop the best, relevant, and most customized scenario for your environment?
Right. I think for us, to say generally, because I know that persons come from the different backgrounds and disciplines. But the first set of competencies we need is to actually develop a level of expertise in your area. I'm putting that out there because those are like at your core. So for us, we're in the business of performance management. We ensure that all our officers are trained and can demonstrate a level of competence or expertise in our core area. The other core competence is about data collection and analysis. And when I'm saying data, statistical data, operational data, performance data. We have to have the capacity and also the competence to collect and analyze, interpret, yes, and contextualize data. In order to develop scenarios, there is a need to develop that kind of strategic thinking ability. And because scenario planning really engages the human mind to be the catalyst to input the information, develop and see patterns, trends, recognize these patterns and trends, and also to organize and communicate the information. So our competence is around developing the human mind. And as managers, we have to have this sort of competence and integrity. Well, integrity is the right word, but the capability to challenge our mind, to stretch our mind, yes, and to cleanse our minds of illusions about where we are and what is possible around our resources that are available, and strip our minds from any biases. And by clearing our minds and having a good understanding of the role of the organization and the role of management, we can actually carry out scenario planning very, very effectively. Thanks, Lord.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. Now, there are other questions in the chat, so do keep the questions coming. And I think I see a raised hand here. Arlene. Arlene.
Hi.
You're unmuted.
Oh,
yes.
okay. Hi, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Sean. Excellent presentation. Just to add in terms of the competencies, I don't know if we could consider it a competency. Well, maybe in this new environment, the whole issue of innovation and creativity, because as we go to a new normal, we really need to be able to think outside the box. So I know to some extent the strategic thinking and the stretch gets there, but we really need to have a new kind of visioning, you know?
I agree totally, Arlene. And for innovation and creativity, I don't leave that one to chance in my branch. There's actually a process, a 10-step process that allows you to filter your innovative thoughts into your strategy. So we have to have the competence, but just like project management or risk management, you can actually apply an innovation process. Yes, and it's about, in innovation they call it jumping the curve. Oh, did the company that made the first refrigerator was not the company that invented ice. If you study innovation sometimes comes from the most unlikely sources. So what we need in our organizations are processes that seek out ideas and assess these ideas in terms of how, and also build incentives. That's the other thing why we are not so innovative. Our organizations, we don't have any incentives to invite idea generation and testing. And sometimes, because we don't have a process, management and sometimes we are very reactive and we are not risk takers. And we don't create the space or the budget to try new things. So I agree with you, we need the competence around innovative thinking, but I think what we can learn from the private sector put deliberate processes in place to encourage innovation and develop the incentives around problem solving. So I really want to support your question, and that is a key ingredient to supporting any kind of implementation of new strategies. Yes, that will have us continue to create value and be relevant in the future, especially in this COVID environment.
There is a follow-up question here. So from Nicola, she's asking, is there software to help persons, to help teams to conduct scenario planning that's available out there?
There are many planning software out there. I have not any of which can be adapted. So for instance, we use the Cascade software to support our scenario planning processes. The software that we use is called Cascade. However, the danger with applying software to any planning process is that there is always a garbage in, garbage out equation. So an organization that is not innovative, that is low on strategic thinking, that is not producing new products and services, that is not building the incentive for organizations, for employees to innovate, and cannot shift. Investing in a software or applying a software to planning processes, sometimes you wouldn't get the benefit. And I have had the experience of, even developing my own software, and I find what is most important in the application of software in any kind of planning process is about the maturity of the organization and its management team, and in application of strategic thinking.
All right, thank you so much. And there are still some more questions in the chat. This is from Joan, and she's asking, read the scenario matrix. The good outcome is associated with your branch not continuing to be relevant and effective. Would you please elaborate on that reasoning, or did I misread the matrix?
Hold on to the matrix.
Is that it?
No, they go up. She's saying we have good. That is in the lower. No. Go back up. No. Up. That's a business model. One more slide. One down line. That little box thing, that little 4-quadrant thing.
So this is it?
Right.
Scenario matrix, yes? Okay.
Right. I don't recall the name of the person who asked the question.
Joan.
But what I had, Joan?
Joan.
Joan, right. Joan, in response, in scenario planning, in developing scenarios, you have to give each scenario a name, right? So when I look at this scenario, because I just give names around outcomes, I'm saying, okay, if we have efficient, you're comparing for this quadrant here, you're comparing efficient prompt rollout of the PMS, so that's positive, and you're comparing it with a negative, meaning that the work that we have done so far, because the rollout of the PMS would not need a lot of resources, we think we could still efficiently roll out the PMS. However, we would have a resource constraint on the branch itself in terms of our operating costs and funding those costs. So we are comparing a positive and a negative. So if we have a continued rollout of the PMS, meaning that government on a whole would keep on adopting our RBM solutions, it would be a good outcome. It would not be the best outcome, but it will still be a good outcome. So I'm comparing a negative of not continuing to be relevant. However, maybe the Ministry of Finance decides to close us down, but take over the PMS rollout in another division down there. It will be good for managing for results across government, but it might not be good for the division, but for the government it would be good. But the best outcome is to have the efficient rollout and for the PMEB to be managing that process. And this could likely happen to this June, because we are actually planning. You have to plan in the event that you're not continuing to recruit your staff. I have staff that will be going off on retirement. Maybe we can't replace them. I have staff that may leave for other opportunities. But at the same time, I recognize that that likely factor could happen. So I'm comparing the continued rollout of the PMS with a factor of us not continuing to be relevant. So to me, that's a good outcome overall for RBN.
Right. Thank you so much, Sean. Now we are almost at the end. We're going to just take one more question. And folks, if we didn't get to your question, we do apologize, but we will share our email address to which you could, send those questions and we can provide some further responses to them, all right? But the last question I'm going to take from Cherise Glasgow, and she's asking, how do we link project value management to the performance management system in a strategic way? And with that, we'll also invite you, once you've responded to that question, to just also share with us your closing thoughts on this topic. So let me repeat your question. How do we link project value management to the performance management system in a strategic manner?
I think that's an excellent question. I am not an expert on project value management, but performance management is generally about managing not only the resources, but the key processes and programs of an organization. So performance management is the broader topic that project management or project value management would fall within. So strategically, how I would link it is that I would identify project value management as a key internal. Yes, right?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I would identify project value management as a key component in performance management and link it through a strategy map. Now, in other words, I would need to understand that in order to take full advantage of project value management, the organization would need to have its key competencies and capabilities to support project value management, identified, resource, invested, people trained. If more than likely you would need some sort of ICT component, and strategically you would need to change some processes or some actions in the organization to take full advantage of project value management. And then I would say identify project value management now as a key internal business process and have somebody or some entity or some unit or branch responsible for delivering the outputs of project value management, and then develop indicators that we can see if the benefit of project value management, the organization or the implementing unit is realizing that benefit. So performance management provides a clear framework that links your internal business processes to those capabilities and competencies that you would need in the organization, and have the accountability structures and measurement systems identified to see if that activity is being carried out And if that activity is not only delivering the outputs, but also is it creating the kind of benefit or competitive advantage, yes, for the organization by pursuing project value management. That's my best shot at it. Thanks, Lloyd.
All right, great. And folks, we have come to the end of our presentation. We want to thank Sean so very, very much for an excellent, informative, and thought-provoking presentation on scenario planning. And our next webinar will be on June 23, and the topic then will be data analysis and visualization in policy management. And we're very pleased we will have two presenters, the Honorable Minister Melford Nicholas, Minister of Information Broadcasting, Telecommunications and IT from the government of Antigua and Barbuda, and he will also be joined by Mr. Leslie Leafu, who is Director at Incost Services Limited. He specializes in data analytics, automation, and artificial intelligence. In addition, we do have our call open for our mid-level leadership development programs, or totally online virtual leadership development program targeting mid-level leaders. And so do go to our website at caribbeanleadership.org for further details, for registration, etc. And if in general you want to find out more about our technical assistance services or other leadership development programs, do contact us at CARICAD at caricad.net. And so before you leave us, we're going to ask you kindly to just complete our poll, and the poll will be launched shortly. We'd like to hear from our